Well, good morning, everybody. Hi there. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Adam Chirinas, and I'm the CEO and founder of Healthlaunchpad. I hope you can see my screen. Should say, what flavor is your champion? So that's today's webinar. If you can, what I'll ask you to do is mute your phones, but keep your video on. I like to make these interactive, and I hope that we'll have time at the end for some networking. It's always I like these sessions to be an opportunity for you guys to meet each other. So today's goals are to help you gain new perspective on why complex sales get stuck. And in particular, learn about the different types of champion that can help you move deals through the pipeline faster. So a little bit about me and my company. So Healthlaunchpad is a company I started earlier this year. It's a new kind of healthcare sales and marketing firm. And we do three things. My primary purpose is to help you learn new ways to grow your business. Second is opportunities like this to connect with each other. I'll talk a little bit more about other ways you can do that in a second. And then last but not least, my job is to help you grow your business. And I do that in three ways. So I help you get customer insight by talking to prospective customers. I help you develop go-to-market programs, and I specialize in account-based marketing. And so in that regard, what I do is I'll help you pinpoint where to improve and give you greater leverage with your customers, with your prospects, help you gain better insights, and then develop new ways to grow your business and move deals through the pipeline. So that's my commercial about my business. The last thing is I want to invite you to also join Healthlaunchpad Connect if you're not already a member. This is a free, there's no charge for this. It's an exclusive community for senior healthcare sales and marketing professionals like yourself. We've got about 140 people who've already signed up to be part of this. And are already finding that it's a great place to network with peers, get help, get feedback, even potentially explore new career opportunities. And we do this in a number of different ways. We have a Slack group, and then a new thing that we're going to be doing starting in a couple of weeks are collaboration sessions. So these are exclusively for members of the Connect community, and they're run by members of the community. So I'm going to facilitate, but each session will be led actually by somebody like yourself. And you guys will pick the topic. So the first topic is actually going to be on creating new opportunities in the new normal. And Ed Stefanidis is going to be the community leader of that session. So if you want to join, number of ways you can do it. If you just, simple thing is, just add me in the chat, and I'll go back later on and add you to the group. If not, you can, I'll be sending out communication where you can sign up. But I think the people who are a member of this are enjoying it. Okay, so let's move on to today's webinar. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is based on a book called The Challenger Customer. So this was written by a group of executives from the Corporate Executive Board, which is actually now part of Gartner. They were acquired a couple of years ago. And it was a follow-up to the Challenger Sale, which is actually the book which more people are familiar with. I actually like this book better. I like the Challenger Sale plenty, but this one I think is actually an even better book. And what I like about it is that they talk to over 3,000 stakeholders in B2B buying purchases. And so it's based on real evidence, which, let's face it, a lot of business books are not. So one of the topics that it it raises is why deals are moving slower. I mean, we all feel like they are moving slower, and the reality is that they are indeed moving slower, and especially so in healthcare. And that's for a number of reasons. First of all, there's consolidation. So your bigger organizations are harder to deal with, a bit more complex. Healthcare is flatter and more consensus driven than many organizations. So the old trick of getting to the CEO, quite often doesn't really add actually any value and doesn't actually really help you. Because information is so much more freely available, stakeholders form their own opinion. And often, they've kind of made decisions before they get to you. I think it's quite a well-known stat that says something like 70% of buyers have formed an opinion before they even speak to a vendor. Next thing that's slowing things down is compliance and risk management. We all know about that in healthcare, things like HIPAA, for example, and security assessments that are getting harder and harder. And then you get the 1 in 3 problem, which is that thing that I think many of us experience, which is you think you've closed the sale, you think you're about to close the sale, and they say, hey, we've got some great news for you. You've made the shortlist and you're 1 of 3. And, we have to talk to 3 vendors. It's part of our bylaws. And the problem for that is not only does it stretch the sales cycle out, but it also typically ends up in smaller, poorer quality deals because they become more competitive. And then last but not least, COVID-19, as we all know, has made this just much, much worse. So I'm actually going to talk a little bit about stakeholders and champions in a second, but before I do that, I'd like to get your feedback. I'd actually like to ask you a question, and the question is, how many decision makers are involved in your typical sale? So you should see a poll coming up, and just take a second to answer that. Can we see the? Yep. Okay. I guess people can see the poll. There we go. I'm going to give it another 20 seconds. Okay. All right. So let me end the poll, and I'm going to share the results. So interesting. So the highest numbers are 5 and 3. And I'll tell you, 5 is not unusual. 3 is quite unusual, and more is actually much more common. So if you're really only dealing with 3 people, you're actually pretty lucky. This is some research from the Corporate Executive Board, and they looked across these large corporations and asked them, asked the vendors when they're dealing with these corporations, what's the typical size of the buying team? And then, based on how their sales performed, they looked at the purchase likelihood. And so what you see is that, if you're only dealing with 1 person, you've got an 80%, you're 80% more likely to close than if there were more people involved. But when there's 2 to 5 people involved, your odds go down to 50%, and anything above that, your odds are getting down to 30%. And interestingly, the average number of buying groups, which this is across all business to business type enterprises, but I believe actually is probably more typical when you're selling to large healthcare systems, is at least 5.4. And so, and in those cases, your chances of closing a deal are significantly lower. The reason, one of the other things that these guys at the CEB looked into was what they call decision-making dysfunction. And so what they did was they asked the community of about 3,000 buyers to rate in terms of level of difficulty, how difficult it was to make decisions across the three typical stages of a purchase. So, in simple terms, companies go through three stages: defining the problem, agreeing on what the solution is going to look like. So what is it that they're going to go out and buy? And then actually selecting a supplier. And so maybe not surprisingly, making an individual decision for each member of a buying group was relatively easy, but trying to get consensus was really hard, especially when it comes to actually agreeing on what solution it is. What was kind of surprising to me was that actually agreeing, once they've agreed on what the problem is they're trying to solve and how they're going to go about solving it, actually agreeing on which vendor they're going to engage is relatively easy, and there's a lot less dysfunction. So a dysfunction is the gap between what I think as an individual member and what the group thinks. And the challenge for us as vendors is that we're typically brought in late. So they actually said they in 6 out of 10 cases, suppliers are not brought in until after the solution has been determined. So they're really just trying to at that point, they're just making a vendor selection. And what we know is that if we can get involved here much earlier in the process, we can make a greater impact on closing the deal. So, we all have a common set of strategies, right? So we've all got our game plans. Number one is finding a champion. And then what we do is we try and track all the stakeholders down and win them over. We gain alignment. We're increasingly using content to shift from business to business to person marketing. So we're developing personas, we're tailoring the message, and then we're personalizing the content for each one of those. And you know what? It's frustrating. It's labor intensive, and it doesn't work that great as much as we want to. So I'm going to change gears here and focus on the champion, because that is, I think, for all of us, is job number one. I was the founder and CEO of a health tech company, which we exited last year. And we had a very disciplined sales process. And one of the requirements to move for an opportunity to be qualified is the salesperson needed to have identified and qualified that they had a champion. In my view, and this is not rocket science, in my view, if you don't have a champion, your odds of closing a sale are extremely low, if not non-existent. And so, what does the ideal champion look like? So, these are the characteristics that we hear about a typical champion. They're readily accessible, they're willing to talk, they provide you with information that's typically unavailable to suppliers, they may be pro your solution, they're great at influencing and convincing others, they always tell you the truth, they're well regarded and credible by their colleagues, they're great at selling new ideas, and they often deliver on their commitments and sometimes even over deliver. They got some benefit from the sale, and they love to network you with the other stakeholders. And so I've actually got a picture of what this champion looks like. So this is your ideal champion. Yeah, they don't exist. And we all know that, right? I mean, there's no one that ever meets those ideal criteria. So what the corporate executive board did was they segmented the different types of personas that the respondents in their research survey were encountering. So they talked to the vendors and said, can you characterize these different types of personas? And they came up with 7 different persona types. So the first one is called the go-getter. So this is somebody who champions others good ideas. They always deliver more than asked, and they learn from the mistakes and they move on. So that's their that's their superpower. The next group is what's called the skeptic. So these are people who are a lot more reserved. They're harder to engage. They're much more risk averse. They need a lot of help in preparing influential stakeholders for change and for big ideas. And they like incrementalism. So they like small wins first and then building up to a bigger deal. Then there's the friend. That's the guy or gal who's readily accessible, loves talking with you guys, puts you in touch with everybody, likes to create events where you can meet their colleagues, and they're always available. You can always count on getting a meeting with them and introducing them to your colleagues. Then there's the teacher. So this is the big vision person. This is someone who often teaches new insights, and because of their reputation, their colleagues and senior executives seek them out for their opinions, and they're really good at selling internally. Fifth one is the guide. So this is somebody who provides information that's typically unavailable to vendors. They speak the truth with vendors, and they distribute information equally. So this is the kind of more sort of equitable persona of champion. Then there's the climber. So this is someone who's kind of, they're in it for them. They want to gain from this project. They want personal rewards for risks that they're going to take. I mean, I don't mean necessarily accepting a bribe, but they want to know what's in it for them. And they're big self-promoters. They like to tell everybody about their success. The last champion are the ones that we all avoid. And sometimes we come across them, right? They're the blocker. They don't really want to move ahead with anything. They view everything that you're doing as distracting, and they're unhelpful. And we know that when we're dealing with somebody like that we're dead in the water. So I thought these were helpful personas, and we'll spend a bit of time on these. But I thought what was most interesting was was the degree to which each one of these personas can help you move a deal forward. So what the CEB did was they assessed the likelihood of each one of these different personas being able to drive change within an organization from highly unlikely to highly likely. And I found the results of this particularly interesting. So the most effective, maybe not surprisingly, is the go-getter. So if you're working with a go-getter and you're developing a good relationship, you've got good chances of closing the sale. The teacher, if you work with them the right way, can be very effective. And the skeptic, although they're very reserved, can also be really effective in closing the sale. The guide, maybe because they're more equitable and they're sharing information equally, if asked, is less effective. The friend, which is, I think in many cases we sort of become dependent on the friend, is very ineffective. Although we might think they're helping us, and they think they're helping us, don't necessarily get us over the line. A senior sales guy I used to work with described it as you pretend to buy and I'll pretend to sell. And we end up in that kind of dynamic. Not surprisingly, the climber is in it for them, is unhelpful. And then the blocker is obviously not going to help you at all. So what the CB did was they broke these into two different groups of personas, the mobilizers and the talkers. So the three mobilizers are the personas that you want to find, that you know if you're working with them, that you've got a good chance. If you're working with the talkers, you're at a disadvantage, or you may actually be, the deal may, the odds of you closing may be against you. I thought this insight was particularly interesting. What they found was that sales reps who engage most with these three types of champions are 31% more likely to be high performers. So there was a high correlation between effective salespeople and the type of personas that they sought out. They instinctively know the right type of champion to help them bring a deal over the line. So I want to play a little game with you guys. I've gone through 5 deals that I worked on in my past life with Unify Health, which was a secure communications system. And I'm going to give you, I'm going to go through a little case study on these, and I'd like you to try and guess the champion. First deal was a win. This was a large healthcare system, which actually was the result of the merger of 2 medium-sized healthcare systems in the Northeast. And because it was a large healthcare system, there were a lot of people involved, and it took us well over a year to close this deal. The deal actually came in through an introduction to the Chief Innovation Officer, which was surprising because in this case, we were actually replacing some existing technology. We were then networked with the Chief Medical Officer, then Chief Strategy Officer, who were very interested in the solution. And we worked with all 3 of their direct reports. So the CMO got us in touch with a group of physicians. We worked very closely with the VP of Innovation, and we also worked very closely with the marketing director. The technology folks were actually brought in somewhat later into the process. The CIO was actually new. We dealt with an interim CIO, and then a CIO from outside came in. And we dealt throughout most of the process with their CTO and CMIO. So in the chat, put a guess as to which one you thought was my champion. Take a sec. So once somebody says physician exec, anybody else got any guesses? Strategy, there you go, someone else's strategy, that's interesting. Anybody else? CTO, marketing, any more? I'll take one more guess. CMO, VP of Innovation. Okay, so Monica, you're the only one who guessed it. It was the VP of Innovation. And this person was a go-getter. So although she was actually all about big ideas, the thing that I really liked and admired about this particular person is that she was all about championing other people's good ideas. Not a credit taker, not in it for taking personal credit. She always delivered more than was asked. I mean, we could absolutely count on her. And when there were screw ups in the process, there was never any blame. And I thought that was when I was looking back on these, it seemed particularly interesting to me that she would be the champion, because as I said, this was not actually an innovative technology to them. They already had a couple of incumbents that we were replacing. So next one, this was a win with a large tertiary hospital. So I think it was like a 400-bed hospital. My partner had actually been on staff there. He had a great relationship with this guy who was the CMO. He also, he knew the CEO pretty well, knew the chief operating officer well as well, and had been part of the physician executive team there. So he worked very closely with this particular individual. On the IT side, there was a new CIO, and this person had actually come from a previous customer. And then we worked with his application director, a very methodical guy. And then the IT manager. And the IT manager actually initially managed the process until they actually left. They left their position actually about 2 months into this. So again, anybody want to take a guess? Let's have a guess. Who's anybody on thinks it's the CMO? CIO. Somebody said CIO. Stick with physician exec. There you go. I like this. So people are actually sticking with the previous bet on the basis that eventually will come around. MD executive, CIO. All right. You're not going to guess it here. It actually was the application director. And they were the last person we got to. And they were very much a skeptic. They were probably the most resistant to, the second most resistant person to our proposal. Very risk averse, good at managing up, and very methodical in how they wanted to break the deal down and how we were going to deploy it. And he was, absolutely right. He knew his organization well, and we were successful as a result. Interesting aside on the CIO, is the CIO almost killed our deal because he'd come over from an existing customer where we were actually selected over his head. A very complicated political story, and he actually had it we thought he kind of had it in for us, but he was surrounded by folks who said, no, we want to give them a chance. He eventually, though, he became actually a very big advocate of ours. A small regional healthcare system. So this was a 3-hospital system. CEO who's really had a great reputation in the region of being very innovative. The CMO we dealt with a lot. The physician executive team were were extremely involved in the process. The CIO was the first person we met, really connected well with him, but we also worked really well with the whole group of folks underneath them. So quick guess. All right. Actually, I'll tell you this one. No, not the CEO. It was actually, this case, it was the CIO who was the champion. And this guy was a teacher and still is. Big ideas guy. I think actually was selected by his CEO because the CEO was innovative and he liked how innovative this guy was. And he was always sought out for new ideas with new technology, and he was very convincing. And he became a big advocate of ours because he liked the innovativeness of our solution. So I'm going to do a couple of losses. So this was a large tertiary hospital. In this case, I'm not going to ask you to guess. I'm actually going to go through it. It's interesting. We were brought in by the CEO because he had a great relationship with our chairman. And as far as he was concerned, they were going to buy our solution. The only thing is that he then handed the process off to a new CIO. And this guy, perfectly equitable. He was, in fact, I think, a guide in the way that he managed the process. But the problem was that the requirements changed. So the reason we were brought in by the CEO essentially governed the requirements. I mean, he had things that he wanted to accomplish strategically. But as soon as the CIO got involved, he reached out to all of these folks here, the physician exec, particularly the nursing exec. Emergency room is very actively involved. And they came up with a whole different set of requirements that worked against us and actually was worked more in favor of another vendor. So despite having, a really strong relationship with the CEO and having a very good relationship with the CIO, there's no animosity. Because he was equitable in how he managed the process, and the requirements flipped, we lost out. Last one is a regional healthcare network with a big academic medical center. So in this case, we were brought in by one of the hospital CEOs. So there were, I think, 6 hospitals. One of the hospital CEOs brought us in. He networked us with the other stakeholders. The CIO is a renowned climber. He is like one of the biggest self-publicists I've come across in the industry. And other folks I know who know him say, oh yeah, that's his reputation. And the deal became all about him. And in the end, I think they failed to make a decision about doing anything. So we just, the whole deal died out because there wasn't really anything in it for him. So I found that once I'd read that book and sort of thought about those champions, it made me look at those deals through a completely new light. So I guess the next question then is well, what do you actually do about this? Is there, how do you activate your mobilizer champions? So I think there are 4 steps to this. The first thing is you've got to identify them, right? And you do that through better qualification. So I think that it's not just about identifying your champion, but it's actually trying to figure out what persona of champion you have. Because once you know that, you then know how to motivate them. You also will give you a sense of, what your odds are based on the persona. The second thing is about teaching them. So it's teaching the mobilizers something that motivates them to take action. And I think particularly when you've got somebody like a skeptic, you've got to give them something which is going to get them moving forward. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can coach them in a minute. Thirdly is tailoring. And that's tailoring the engagement effort to the specific mobilizer type. So there are different strategies with each one of those 3 mobilizers, which is based on the type of their characteristics and their personality. And then the last thing is about empowering them to take control of the consensus building project. So it's equipping them with the tools to change the deal. So to get the deal pushed through. And I'm going to share some examples of that in a second. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, and I can do this offline with you if you're interested. But I think that it's important in your qualification process to add in questions that will get your champions to identify if they're a mobilizer. So, an example of a type of question that you might ask is, throughout the process, what type of information are you going to need from us to help you manage this? So if the person says, don't worry about this, I've got this, they're probably a friend, but you probably already knew that anyway. If they say something like, we really want to learn about best practice around the implementation process, that's usually the sign of a go-getter because they're very methodical. If they start focusing on the risk, they're probably a skeptic. And so this is the kind of thing, it's like you're not going to identify it off one question, but you're probably going to do this over a series of conversations as you start to form a picture in your head about which bucket they fit into. Teaching is absolutely critical. And as much as anything, it's unteaching, because you've got to change the way that they think about how they're solving this problem. And the key to that is something called commercial insight. So this is an insight that captures their attention, that really gets them to lean forward when you're talking to them. And it teaches them something new and compelling about their business. And that's a really important point, right? Because we're always so focused on telling them about our business and our solution, that this is more about telling them about something about their business that they need to actually take action on. And maybe more importantly, what the cost of inaction is. So if you don't do something about this, this is what's going to happen to you. And then last but not least, it's something unique that leads them back to you. So I'm going to share an example of this. And this actually works for the folks who've kind of got, fewer stakeholders. There's a company called Denstply. and they sell equipment to professional equipment to dental surgeries. And a few years back, they came up with the first cordless instruments for dental hygienists. And it was, as you can see, I mean, this is a really beautifully designed product. And the dentists loved the product. They absolutely thought this was fantastic. They thought this was the best thing since sliced bread. But they said, wow, we really need to think about this. We really need to, and I'm sure that next year we'll be thinking about buying this. So while the dentists were really excited about the product, there wasn't anything that was going to make them change. There wasn't anything that was going to make them rip out their, current instruments and adopt these new technologies. And so Denstply went back to the drawing board, and what they realized was that they hadn't really figured out. They were so sort of enamored with the sexiness of the technology, they hadn't actually figured out what problem that they were really trying to solve. And when you think about it, this is maybe not surprising, but dental hygienists actually develop a lot of sort of repetitive stress injuries and sort of injuries related to all of the equipment that they have to handle, because they're working at odd angles, holding pieces of equipment that are being bent against them. There's a cord pulling the equipment around. And so there's a lot of absenteeism with dental hygienists. And that actually is a huge productivity problem, and it costs the dentist money because they've got to get in substitutes, and sometimes they have to cancel a lot of appointments. And they were able to quantify, and they developed a calculator for each dentist where they could show them the amount of time and productivities improvement that they would save by switching over to their equipment. And that turned things around. So as soon as the dentist saw the business benefit of buying this sexy technology, they actually started to move into action. The next point is about tailoring your sales approach. And I think there's a different strategy for each different one of these mobilizers. For the go-getter, it's a much more rational approach. You want to focus on structure, process, hard facts, being methodical. You need to arm them with, to handle the objections. So you might have a session with them to talk about the typical objections that their bosses are going to raise, and then explain to them how they handle it. With a skeptic, it's more about helping them get buy-in. And so things like data and testimonials are going to be key. Again, these are the ones that are sort of most reticent about actually moving a deal forward. And you should be open, and they'll actually appreciate an open conversation about the risks with implementation and the mitigation strategies to make it successful. Because these guys assume everything is going to go wrong. And so, don't hide behind, don't hide behind that. Come forward with how you handle the potential problems that will come up. They'll respect you more for it. With teachers, it's all about helping them bring their vision to life. So, you're essentially their project manager. If you make yourself subservient to them in making their vision attainable, they'll take you all the way through to closing the deal. I thought a quite good example. So the other thing that you need to do in terms of tailoring is about tailoring content as well, and creating content specifically for the mobilizers. So an example of that is a company called Smart Technologies that provide collaboration tools for the education sector. And part of the challenge they've got is that by the time they usually get to the mobilizers, to actually talk with a prospective educational establishment, they're already well informed, and they've already decided, they've already decided the path that they're going down. And so the challenge they were trying to figure out was, how do you get them engaged earlier in the process, and particularly how do you identify the mobilizers? So the commercial insight that they hooked onto was the growth of remote work, and that remote work in particular is leading to employee disengagement, which is affecting lower productivity and teacher turnover. And so they developed an idea focused on this problem, which is develop the power of inspired collaboration. And they used video mailers to tell the story about the tragedy of disengagement. So they weren't focused on their technology. They were focused on the problem and how what solving that problem would mean to the organizations they were selling to. And it painted a vision of inspired collaboration, a better world. And they had a neat little call to action in it, which is to take the collaboration appraisal. So again, nothing to do, not specifically about their technology, but about focused on the problem that they were trying to solve. And this actually gathered 1,500 appraisals from companies that were interested in their solution. So again, changing the way that you use content can have a massive impact on the way that you generate new opportunities. I'm actually working right now with a company on a tool to empower mobilizers. I'm working with an enterprise software vendor that sells asset management software to HTMs, the clinical engineers of healthcare systems. And these guys are dependent on the HTM managers to champion the solutions. And what they've found is that historically, their sale has been very product oriented. And as budgets get tighter, the C-suite is scrutinizing every purchase, with a much higher level of attention. And so what I'm working with them to do is to develop a way to mobilize them with the C-suite and their focus on financial issues. So what we've done is we've developed a tool which focuses on the ROI and the benefit to the organization. So it seems like a kind of like, well, duh, why wouldn't you do that? But bear in mind that up till now, the people that they've been selling to, the champions that they've been selling to, have actually had quite a lot of autonomy in what they could buy. Now they need to get greater justification. And so I'm in the process of training the salespeople, not only how to use the tool, but how to sell differently to the C-suite. And more importantly, how to arm their champions to be able to sell up the organization. So, that's the conclusion of my presentation. But in summary, I think that the key things here is to understand the type of champion you have. The second thing is to recognize that 4 out of 7 of those champions are either going to hurt your chances, certainly lower your odds. And not knowing is a drain on your resource, and actually, it hurts your ability to forecast. I think it's a very important thing to know. You can mobilize your mobilizers more successfully by teaching them something about their business that makes them want to act. And you need to tailor your approach and the content and the tools that you use to mobilize the mobilizers. And the last thing I'd say is that, one thing you might want to take away from this is to think about the content that you're currently using in your marketing, and think about those mobilizer personas and apply a filter. Does the content and the sales tools that you're using right now, do they work for the mobilizers, or are they trying to address all of the different personas? And I would actually focus, I'd be much tougher and much more disciplined about the amount of content that you actually create. Maybe focus on creating less content, not more content. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. Before we go into Q&A, I do want to make an offer to you. I've developed a thing I'm calling the Champions Workshop, which is a 2-hour session with you and your team. and it'll give some additional training on these concepts. And, we can have a quick assessment of the champions in your pipeline, play the, guess the champion game. And then we'll dive into how you currently qualify champions, how you tailor the sale, and then what content you're using to empower the champions. I've got 2 slots open this month. So if you're interested, shoot me an email afterwards. I'd love to talk to you about that. So let's open this up for discussions. I'm going to stop sharing. What questions, what perspectives do you have on this? Does this, you guys, what do you guys think of this? Thoughts, questions, anybody? Do I need to unmute you? No man needs to do that. Hey, Amanda, how are you?
Very useful. Certainly going out at any deal without a champion is definitely a lost journey. But in the past, we thought just having a champion was good enough. But I think you made a good point of qualifying, classifying what those champions may be.
Yeah.
It's no longer good enough to just have a champion as the right champion. The other aspect that is important is the timetable, right? When is the account ready to buy? Because that's one of the failures of forecasting, is the deal never materializes because you fail to identify or convey to the customer that compelling moment where they recognize they need to buy, or you need to set that up for them. So the champion and the compelling moment, or the compelling reason,
the
moment to buy, are key. So I thought this was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. So it's like actually the thing about there's different personas, and what maybe there are different, the compelling moment might look different for each one. One thing I just suggest is, I'll share a link when I send out the recording to this afterwards. It's well worth reading the book. There's so much more to it than I could possibly go through in an hour, and it really helped me to think about. I think if you kind of apply it, a lot of the insights in that to the way that we do account-based marketing, I think it makes. I think it applies a much more sort of a strategic lens to account-based marketing, which can become quite tactical. Anybody who here deals with sort of more than 3 champions? Anybody? We're all everybody's shy today. What's going on, guys? Everybody usually I can't shut you guys up.
I typically find, not to intrude on anybody else participating, but any deal that includes informatics, networking, communications usually involves a lot of people.
Yeah.
When I used to be in the just device, in the healthcare world, it's my world, in the device technology, there were a few champions, but once informatics CIO gets involved, it multiplies. So I agree with you, 5 or 6 is typical, or more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. John, yeah. John, I can't, for some reason I can't hear you. You're unmuted, but can't hear you. Nope, still can't hear you. Do it sign language. All right, great. Actually, Sarah, if you're there, Sarah Larson.
Yes. Hi.
I know that with what you to introduce yourself, because I know you must definitely be dealing with more than 3 champions, more than 3 stakeholders rather.
Yeah. So hopefully you can hear me okay. Yes. And I had read somewhere recently, it might have been in something that you had put out, that like 5.3 is the average number of people that have to touch a sale these days. So that shaped my answer. But yes, I think all the reasons that you've laid out, COVID being one of them, but not the only one, have just increased the challenges of selling into hospitals, health systems, academic medical centers, the multiple buyers, multiple points of entry. And I think your insights are all spot on. And, I have seen some of this material, but I definitely took a few things away today that are making me think a little bit differently. So thank you for that.
In what you sell, is the champion usually the same person? I mean, this was actually, I went back through my own historical cases. It was like, I was actually shocked at how, I couldn't have guessed who the champion was going to be there wasn't a repeatable champion.
Yeah, it's funny. And I think things have changed. I think things have evolved a bit, even in the last 6 months, as budgets have tightened significantly in the provider landscape in particular with hospitals and health systems. And I think it's just an art and a science to ask the question and figure out who that person is without using the vernacular of, so who's the champion? And are you a teacher or a skeptic? Let's take a poll. And I love the polls because they're a helpful, to sort of spot check on the data. So I think it's a matter of asking the questions, earning the right to ask the question of who will need to be involved. And I don't think you can do that until and unless you have taught them something about their business, to your point, because otherwise you're just another vendor. Exactly.
Absolutely right. Anybody have any questions about this, or want to ask anybody else on the who's online right now? No, I think I can see John desperately trying to talk. Maybe you put it in chat. Maybe I could. All right. Listen, everybody. I think appreciate it. Unless there's any more questions, I'm gonna we can give everybody back the last 5 minutes. Again, if you're interested in joining the network, if you're not already part of it, but join Connect, either shoot me an email or I'll leave the chat open for a few more minutes. Thanks very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your summer.
Thanks so much, Adam. Great stuff. Bye.
Guys. Bye.
Thanks, Adam. Bye, everybody.